Are we ready? 1, 2, 3. Hey everybody, welcome back to Chalkboard History. Today is I'm not wearing a coat day. It is Thursday. It's a bit warm outside.
It is. Yep.
We've already had a morning. Our adept camera person set off the alarm. Police almost showed up.
All right, I didn't know about that.
Oh,
That's fun.
It was a time. It was almost as funny as "Don't charge uphill, me boys." It was just a great moment.
I never knew that Robert E. Lee was fresh off the boat from Ireland.
Yes,
Never picked that
as
one
Jon
up.
Stewart said, I didn't know he was a leprechaun. You just can't make some things up. So today we're going to talk about dun, 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 dun,
You've got the chalkboard, so you're the one that has to know what we're talking about.
Franklin.
The whole thing, all of it.
Benjamin Franklin. Oh, wait a minute. That's another episode.
That's the Apple Plus.
We're going to
TV
talk
series.
about Frank.
Cheatham
Franklin.
or Carter.
So, what are we talking about in regards to Franklin, Tennessee?
Well, I think we talked about the battle, but something I think that I've always kind of been curious, and you and I have talked about it a lot, but we've never really sat down and actually had a conversation about how did you get into Franklin?
I was bored.
You were bored?
I was bored.
That's it? That's the only answer?
I picked up a book one day.
That was it?
5 Tragic Hours.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
It's like a drug addiction, You
start
all of
with
a sudden
5
you're
Tragic
just
Hours.
like, boom, next thing you know. I don't know. I have no idea. It was probably in the early 80s, and it was about the time of 5 Tragic Hours. I mean, I know it was before I was in high school.
Really? Wow. So then it just kind of came on, and then what? In the 90s you started writing?
Yeah.
For Cause and for Country for the first edition, right?
For the first edition, I started writing. I remember we were living in a house in Minnesota at the time, and I remember for some reason I think one of the early moments of me writing, I was sitting by an open window with this classy brass ashtray because I used to smoke. Mm-hmm. So the deliciousness of a Marlboro Red while I was learning about the Army of Tennessee. And it was really about that. It was really about, because I knew, Shiloh and Murfreesboro and Chattanooga and Chickamauga. And so having rejected almost completely the Eastern Theater, I was interested in this Eastern Theater guy, John Bell Hood, being in command of the Army of Tennessee. So that was the start.
So really, it's built off of a foundation of just being interested in the Civil War. Generally.
Being bored and smoking cigarettes, I think, is the theme of this story.
That should be the title of the episode.
Listen.
Bored and smoking cigarettes.
Wintertime in Minnesota, there are many long hours.
So when you did sit down to actually write it, once you figured out, you're going to write about Franklin, yes, you're going to write about John Bell Hood. I mean, what was the general kind of aspect? What did you want people to come away from when they read it?
By the time I started writing, Wiley Sword's book was out, Embrace an Angry Wind. And so, and then there was that horrible episode about the Tennessee campaign on Civil War Journal, you know.
Danny Glover.
Danny Glover. And listen, it was a great series, but that particular episode I was so excited for. And it just sucked so badly because it was everything that 5 Tragic Hours had kind of dabbled around, and Sword just took it to another level. And the tragedy is they're all McDonough, Connolly, Sword. They're far better writers than I am. But I just thought they were just completely off their rocker when it came to Hood, and almost completely ignoring the other side. So. Yeah. I initially was writing about just trying to understand a little bit more about the Army, and then the Army of Tennessee, that is. And then it became really trying to tell the story of what had happened at Spring Hill and Franklin without writing about Nashville.
So Spring Hill was kind of the thrust then?
It became that, yes, because I was very interested in how Hood was portrayed, and how these who I considered really good historians and writers would take this approach, which seemed to be at odds with, quite honestly, a lot of the facts. I just watched this interview with Connolly. I'd never seen it.
Yeah, I think you sent it to me.
And I just watched it and thought, oh my gosh, this is so good. But it reminded me, and good is subjective, as I watched it, because I was like, I was kind of cringing at several moments. But it reminded me of what really started 30 years ago for me, which was trying to figure out a little bit more about the story. And you know what I guess I've realized in hindsight? Other than the authors I just mentioned in those books, nobody had ever really done it. I mean, there'd been a good bit written, articles and whatnot, and Thomas Hay had written, in the early 20th century, but Sword was the first person. Sorry, Sam Hood, who just, is like, when you say Wiley Sword's name. Wiley Sword was the first person who actually did substantive research on the characters in the armies.
Yeah, his notes section in the book is, it's a lot better than the bibliographical note in Five Tragic Hours.
Which doesn't exist, right? Well, his Sword's bibliography is wonderful.
It's everything, and you can sit there and hunt through it. David Van Dyke, one of our guides here, he loves to talk about how he footnote hunts. And Five Tragic Hours, and it doesn't give you that ability. Embrace Angry Wind does.
Going through Sword's bibliography must have been like, I think I told you a Robert Plant story the other day. It must have been like those kids going through the 78s in the old bin and finding some really cool old blues record because it opened up another door. And I would do that with Sword, and I would go to like Thoburn, this guy in the 50th Ohio, and then I had to actually find the whole like reminiscences and then read it all. And so Sword was just opening up doors. But it still came back to Spring Hill and Hood because I wanted to understand that. I wanted to understand November 29th so I could understand November 30th and then try and figure out how to, relate that to a reader. And I actually wrote the book almost backwards.
So you started with Franklin and then went back?
Oh, I started with Franklin and I quit. I just quit. I did. I quit. I in some point in the late 90s, I quit. I actually almost quit on the book. And then I came back to Spring Hill and it was a visit. It was a visit. And I know it's not that video footage I just found from like 2000. It was a visit here in 97 or 98. Rippavilla, at least it wasn't open that day. There wasn't much going on in Franklin. And it was that visit. And then I was in Columbia, and I was with Bob Duncan in the Murray County Archives. This is all pre-internet. Like, I don't even know that I had a phone. In fact, I'm pretty sure I didn't. And I was going everywhere to get a feel of what had happened here. And that then launched me to write. I think I ended up writing like 200 pages before I ever even got into the Battle of Franklin, because the book ended up being like 500 pages.
Yeah, we're about to.
Yeah, so it was. In fact, I wrote chapter 1 last, which is crazy.
Sometimes you got to build it backwards. You got to figure out where to start.
Well, I figured I couldn't start on November 21st, so I actually dialed all the way back to the first sentence in the book, which I must say I seem very clever in hindsight when I just said compromise was dead.
Do you look back at that and just kind of giggle every now and again?
I don't know what to think. The only thing that I can really say is I truly wonder how unbelievably successful people, musicians, movie stars, producers, I mean, when they look back and it's like, do you think Eddie Van Halen sat around and going, that first album really kicks ass? Yeah, I mean, do you think, you think like Slash goes, Appetite for Destruction is pretty awesome. I mean, I guess maybe you do, but you're so much on the inside. It came up recently. Someone was talking about reading my book, and I was like, I've never read my book. I have not. I've not read, and it kind of jarred me. Like, why would I?
Yeah, you already wrote it.
Well, first of all, it'd be weird to read your own book, at least in my opinion. But it is strange, and it's strange that it's now been long's it been? Almost 20 years since it was published. And 30 years since I started, traipsing around this area. And I so wanted to get inside. I wanted to get inside Ripavilla, and I wanted to get inside the Carter House farm office was like the pot of gold. It was the hill that Lee was...
Never attack up
right.
boys.
Never attack up hill, me boys. The Carter House farm office was like off limits. Like you couldn't go in there. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what they were keeping in there. Like, was there some three-headed baby or something? But it turns out it was all the archives. Mm-hmm. It was all the stuff. Wiley Sword had gone through it, and I think he was the only one. And to this day, I never quite understood why they'd never let me in. But eventually, we got access to those archives. But by then, the book was out. But I wanted to get inside Carnton, and I wanted to look around, and I wanted to get into every cemetery, and I went every place imaginable.
Yeah. I guess I can kind of relate to
17 states. That I can tell you. I went to
17. You hit all the South, right? Any place where you could find an archive.
I hit every part of the North that wasn't in New England or Minnesota. I did because there was, again, pre-internet.
Yeah.
I had to go there.
Yeah.
And sometimes it would be like you'd get this person on the phone who was either old or was a volunteer and didn't really understand what was in the archives, mm-hmm. and you wanted them to get it for you, and it would take them 3 days to get it, and then they would charge you like 50 cents a page to make the copies. Mm-hmm. But I went everywhere. I think I went in Ohio alone to probably 15 or 20 different places. So it wasn't just going to one state one time. It was going there and going to multiple places to dig up everything that I could, which then when you talk about weird, is I donated my whole collection to the BOFT. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the final count was. You went through the binders, right?
I started through.
I mean, it was like, what, 24 binders? Like old-fashioned, like 3-hole punch jobs?
3 dozen, or probably 2-3 dozen binders, but they're in like 6 or 7 different boxes.
Right, and it was just... I remember looking at it at home one day and thinking, well, I don't need this anymore. Seriously. And I was like, which is really weird now talking about it. Like, I'm never going to do that again. Mm-hmm.
And it's everything for the first book. You don't have to write it again. It's gone.
Well, and I don't really have any desire to. I lived in the John Bell Hood, John Schofield, Spring Hill, Franklin world, mm-hmm. for so long that it's just a different place. Like what we do day to day is so different than that. Mm-hmm. So I had to give it up. I had to just let it go.
So in that respect, you've seen that change. So then it's a hard segue, but it's still a segue. Is you were here when the battlefield at Franklin was pretty much covered up.
Ugh,
Urban sprawl everywhere to the south of Carter House, the Pizza Hut, the Domino's, the dollar market, the Mexican market, the 3 houses, the flower shop, the pottery shop, the gym. What was that like?
I looked at a photograph yesterday that we put out on I think it was a Facebook post, mm-hmm. and it was a photograph of when the Blue House, which stood real close to where the Carter Gin was, mm-hmm. was being moved. So it was on those like steel runners, but it was a panoramic shot, so you could see the strip mall mm-hmm. to the west. You know what I saw in the photo? The thing that used to just annoy me to no end. The buildings were bad enough. There was a dumpster behind the strip mall, there was a little store, which by the way, I used to buy cigarettes there.
Is that the dollar market or is that the convenience shop?
I don't know that it was called a dollar market. It was just a dumpy little place run by a lady I think she was like Egyptian. She was just such a nice lady, but I used to buy cigarettes there. But it was the Carnicia next door, mm-hmm. which was like, the little Mexican mart, and there was a dumpster out back. And it was just, it was filled with food, garbage. And I saw it in that photo, and it's like, ugh. It just reminded me of how much I hated it.
Yeah.
And how it used to just, I cannot express my just disdain, not for the people, it's not their fault. Mm-hmm. And it's, frankly, I don't think it's the fault of the people that owned it, who worked there, who ate there. it just was the whole scene, and I would stand there near the gin, and I would talk about the 6th Ohio and Aaron Baldwin and Cleburne's guys hitting the works, and Cockrell's guys coming in from the southeast,
and you get a whiff of the dumpster.
Yeah, and it just I would tell guests someday we're gonna get this. And like that day has now happened years ago, but that photograph brought back some of those just crazy memories.
I think because I only saw the battlefield after much of it had been reclaimed. I didn't see a lot of the stuff.
You were a tiny sprout back in the day.
I was a sprout.
Yeah, don't charge up hill, me boys. He lost a great general.
6 of them.
I don't know what general he was talking about.
I think he was referencing Stonewall Jackson.
Stonewall was dead.
I went for the other 6.
Yeah.
If Stonewall Jackson was at Gettysburg, as Chris White and Chris Mikowski, our friends over American Battlefield Trust, like to say, he would smell very, very bad if he was at Gettysburg.
Ew.
Yeah. Anyways, so you've seen the battlefield be reclaimed. Now we're on the verge of another reclamation project underway.
Oh, boy.
3 different buildings. And those are the 3 buildings that I guess there's 4 because I saw the shop in between. All of that has been reclaimed since I've been coming to Franklin, or will be reclaimed now that I'm here, working here.
You know what's nuts is this footage that I found a few months ago. Mm-hmm. When I was filming that side of Columbia Pike, which is south of Carter House for all the viewers, that office building wasn't there.
The one behind the
White House.
Yeah.
Like that was just, it was kind of a bramble of locust trees and, privet and underbrush. The office building wasn't even there. Mm-hmm. And now we bought it and we're going to tear it down, which is actually just makes me giggle thinking about it. Like, whoosh, never should have been built. So the office goes, that house goes, which is not National Historic Register eligible. We got the house in between, and then that hideous cinder block building, which, that transaction alone is $5 million. And, that's a lot of money, but it's been a lot of money from Pizza Hut, golf course, strip mall, Blue House, this house, that house, Franklin Flower Shop, one thing, old school gymnasium. I mean, that was $500,000 just to tear that thing down.
Yeah.
I don't know what's worse, seeing it how it was and getting, just being so appalled at it and being part of the process. The one thing that I'll never get to experience is the guest who shows up today.
Who's never seen it that way.
Who's never seen it. Or the guest will show up 1 year from today when what we just described is gone.
Yeah.
And that view shed... That
picks up really well on my phone.
That view shed will always exist in their minds. Mm-hmm. And so history does start to, kind of play games with your mind. Veterans, I think, who came back to Franklin in, let's say, the 1890s must have been a bit puzzled because the gin was gone. Mm-hmm. There were already a few houses here and there. And, you could tell it was the battlefield, but I think even for them, they were seeing that sort of just relentless rolling of time. Mm-hmm. And then that rolled into, the 20th century and a lot of apathy, which is, if there was one thing that and this is my opinion, so I can't prove it, although I bet I could produce a lot of evidence that in a court of law I might get a conviction. So we're going to play lawyer. Did I say, have I mentioned done charge of hill, me boys?
Wow, that was a mistake. That's the best part of it.
That line is going to be that's an endless amount of fun. I think I lost my train of thought. I actually completely lost my train of thought thinking about the ridiculousness of don't charge up hill, me boys. I don't know what I was saying. What was I saying? You're listening.
I mean, you were saying that the guys who came back here, history plays kind of a toll on your mind, and
I don't know what I was saying.
Yeah. Well, then the veterans, when they came back,
Joseph.
They were confused by it, puzzled by it, because everything that they had seen was gone. Mm-hmm. A lot of what they had seen is gone. So then I guess maybe just the best way to...
I know what I was going to say.
You were going to do it. Okay.
I know what I was going to say.
Okay,
just
fine.
Came back. I think through the years, I heard over and over and over that what happened in Franklin was so terrible that the people who lived there wanted to forget it.
Yeah, it's just nonsense.
It is just nonsense. I'm sure they did want to forget it, but they didn't. They weren't the ones that they weren't the ones that didn't care or were apathetic. If you look at the Carters and not repairing all of the battle damage, if you look at the McGavicks and maintaining a cemetery, bloodstains in their home, and the people who visited, I think what happened at Franklin, the evidence points to exactly the same thing that happened in Nashville, it happened in Atlanta, some of it happened around Richmond, is time just went on. And by the time it was the early 20th century, a lot of the people who were alive were gone. They hadn't forgotten. They didn't shun it. It was very much a part of their lives.
Right.
It's just that times had changed. And Franklin was very close to a town that was growing, so it was almost impossible to stop some of the early development. I mean, it's a board member of the Battle of Franklin Trust actually shot around an email just last night when they were selling the house lots. I can't pull it up very quickly. They were selling house lots on what is today Claiborne Street, and it said "Live where the battle was fought."
Yeah.
And I was like, ew, that's just a gross marketing scheme, but that's...
Worked for a lot of people.
And they built... I mean, if you drive up and down Claiborne Street today, those lots are
on top of each other.
They're the same lots that were sold in the teens and the 20s.
Yep. Yeah.
What else? What else we have?
So then why do we have to save the battlefield now? Because you saw it when it was in the condition it's in. What's good enough? What's...
Probably a good place to end.
Yeah.
Because it was always important.
Yeah.
That is what I thought that Connolly, McDonough, and Sword had completely missed. That what happened here was important because John Bell Hood had a chance. He really did to take Nashville or to cause an immense amount of trouble for the U.S. War effort and the ultimate conclusion of the war. And so you can call it a Hail Mary or whatever you want. It was important. Lincoln knew it. Grant knew it. George Henry Thomas knew it. The participants knew it. And I think to understand how the war ends, you have to come through this corridor. You have to go from Nashville to Shiloh to Murfreesboro to Chickamauga to Chattanooga to Atlanta and then back to Franklin, because Franklin is ultimately about Nashville. And so the Western Theater kind of ends up in this
big circle,
this big 360-degree loop. And once the war in the West was finally finished, and Vicksburg is a huge part of that war in the West, it's just its own thing, then the war goes east. And really where the war had started, Fort Sumter, Bull Run, where, Gettysburg, it's where Lee was.
Saying never charge uphill, me boys.
Oh, never charge uphill, me boys.
I think that's like the 5th time we've worked it in. That's pretty good.
So the war went east.
Yeah.
But it doesn't get there unless things played out the way that they did here. And I think Franklin and Spring Hill have always been that important. All you had to do was read what the veterans who fought here from the Army of Tennessee and the 4th and the 23rd Corps said about it. Arthur MacArthur said years later that essentially, like Gettysburg, Franklin was a battle that saved. And what he was referencing was it saved 2.5 years of their efforts in trying to end the war. And Franklin could have upended that for months and months and months on end. But it didn't. Hood was defeated, and just a few months later, the war ended.
Bam.
24 minutes and 48 seconds and 5 references to Robert E. Lee advising his troops not to charge uphill.
There we go.
Any last thoughts on Franklin? You've moved here. You live here.
I did, and it's been amazing to watch the work from before I was here. And like you, I wanted to get inside. I wanted to see more things. I wanted to go upstairs at Carnton. I wanted to learn more. And now I'm here, and I'm seeing it, and I'm watching it, and I'm working with you, and I'm working with Bill, and I get to see how the sites are changing, and I get to see how the battlefield is changing. And I don't have the problem that you had. I've never had to lead a battlefield tour behind the dumpster of the Mexican market. But I have had to look at that cinder block building. And one day I won't have to.
Well, Gary Edelman and the crew, Chris, is it just Gary and Chris coming out this fall?
I think it's Gary, Chris, and Chris.
Gary, Chris, and Chris. Double Chris's. Gary Edelman to the west, Eric Jacobson to the east, or however we refer to ourselves. We are going to throw mini balls and case shot at that cinder block building, and we're going to video it. And some people are like, oh, why would you do that? Because it's funny. Because at some point...
Because you have a sense of humor.
Because we have a sense of humor. Because we're going to get to take it down, and that means we win, which means history wins.
Yeah.
And that's really the most rewarding part of this. As I reminded yourself and others the other day, we work in a wonderful environment. Mm-hmm. This is a great job, and, I don't know that it could be any better than being part of living in our time in the 21st century and helping save bits and pieces of the 19th century so that we can better understand where we came from.
And if you want to help with that, visit our website, boft.org/battlefield-reclamation. Look at that.
Look at that marketing pitch. All right, thanks, everybody.